Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to another edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me as always is Justin Gay, your host and director of content. Justin, it was a tough weekend. We didn't know exactly when to record because there was an enormous wreck in the Daytona 500, which actually didn't even happen until Monday afternoon and evening. So we dealt with the news of, well, no news with NASCAR and Ryan Newman. We waited a few days on that. So we're recording later in the week than we had hoped, but we'll put this podcast out on the weekend as week 3 of the XFL comes up. The NBA is back in action, as well as the NFL talking about how many games they want to have in their playoffs and how many games they want to have in their regular season. And then we'll also move to the Major League Baseball cheating scandal that just won't go away. We've got all of that and more right here on episode 318 of Talk Back.
Well, the plan was to record this pod the Sunday after the Daytona 500. And of course, it got rained out. We had to push back. Then the plan was to record it Monday after the Daytona 500. And like everyone else that was a NASCAR fan and then the broader sports community, we really couldn't record because, well, frankly, Eric, we didn't want to be insensitive to the topic because for 2.5 hours after the Daytona 500, we weren't sure if we were going to get great news or we were going to get awful news. And it just didn't feel right to record. And I don't think either one of us were in the mood to record. And now we're later in the week recording this podcast. And Ryan Newman, Eric, in the middle of the week, walks out of Halifax Hospital in Daytona, Florida, with both his daughters in a scene I don't think either one of us thought we were going to see. So, Eric, we go back to Monday night, and you think about that wreck, everything that transpired after that. Just what are your thoughts on the wreck and basically what you saw on Wednesday with Newman leaving the hospital?
Sure, there's a lot to say about this, and it's unfortunate that we weren't able to record last week because I know you and I had texted about, and we've talked in years past about the Clash, the exhibition race that leads up to Speed Weeks. Of course,
did you say the Clash or the Crash?
Well, exactly.
That's pretty much all they did in that race.
That is all they did. And Justin, my concern primarily in the Clash, and then we saw it here again in the Daytona 500, is how much NASCAR continues to play with fire at the end of these races when they, I give them credit, want to end the races under green, but you're just adding so much risk when you line those cars up and you let them go green, white, checkered time and time again. In the Daytona 500, thankfully, they only had to do that once late in the race, but in the Clash, they did it a couple times, tore up a lot of cars, spent a lot of money that I don't think they really need to spend in order to get an exhibition winner. We weren't able to record that story last week, and then here we come to the Daytona 500. They line them up after a caution once again late in the race with sort of a 2 to 3 lap shootout format. And I'm not so sure if it's that necessarily for the Daytona 500 that led to this, or it's just the fact that when you come down to that last 500 yards as you enter the tri-oval, anything really is possible. We've seen that with Austin Dillon going up into the fence. We've seen that in the past with cars going upside down. Clint Boyer has finished restrictor plate races on his roof as well. So we've seen this type of wreck before, but Justin, this one felt dramatically different to us. We knew it as soon as we saw it. It was the way that Newman's car got hit. He certainly is a lucky man, as we now report the story, as hopefully many NASCAR fans know, that indeed he was able to not only stand and walk out of that hospital with his physical abilities, but by all accounts, it looks like his mental abilities as well. And you're right, that wreck looked horrific. I was fearing the absolute worst, even if he was alive. As a husband and a father, I was fearing that his life would be dramatically changed, whether it be that he has a spinal injury or, God forbid, paralysis or something that would alter his ability to participate in all of the things that his daughters were going to have going on as they grew up. And thankfully, we find out on Wednesday that he's going to walk out of the hospital just 48 hours after one of the most horrific wrecks in NASCAR history, due to where his car was actually hit by another vehicle. A pretty rare accident in terms of where his vehicle was hit, but certainly being upside down isn't that rare. Justin, I was as shocked as you were. And I know one of the things we want to talk about here on this podcast right here at the beginning of this episode is just sort of, now that we know that Ryan Newman is okay, and I know both of us and the NASCAR community at large is certainly very happy about that. And so that was our number one priority. And as you said, why we didn't want to record on Monday evening. But now that we know Ryan Newman is okay, we want to talk about NASCAR's PR strategy. Certainly from a medical standpoint, there are family choices that have to be made. There are HIPAA violations that can happen if the hospital releases information too soon or without the family's knowledge or approval. But outside of that, Justin, I just feel like, and I know you and I talked about it at length this week, that NASCAR really handles these things in a much more odd way than some of our other favorite sports like the NFL or the NBA. So Justin, talk to me a little bit about your feelings over the last 48 hours. Again, now knowing that Ryan Newman is okay, I feel like it's not as sensitive of a topic, but what are we going through as fans over those 48 hours when we don't know if the man is alive, paralyzed, or going to walk out of the hospital on Wednesday?
Eric, the best analogy I can give is you go to the doctor, you get some tests run, you go home, and you get a phone call from the doctor that says, we got your test results. We need you to come into the office. You're like, well, what happened? Can't you tell me? No, we need you to come in, and we can get you in 2 days. And then for 48 hours, you're basically like, oh my God, am I dying? What did they find? Why can't they tell me? And you show up to the doctor and they're like, oh, everything's fine on your scan. We just didn't want to tell you over the phone. Like, that's what this felt like, where what every fan saw, what the speculation was, NASCAR bringing out the black screens, they're running media off pit road. It all led up to thinking this was 19 years ago, that a driver has passed away and NASCAR wants to cut as much of the video and photos and everything they can of the extraction out of the car of Ryan Newman, getting him into the ambulance so that those type of pictures don't get leaked out. And I think you and I thought after the race, he's probably passed away. There's no way if he's awake and alert, they wouldn't tell us that. Why would Fox leave the broadcast and not tell us that? We watch NFL every Sunday. We see guys get carted off. Guys get put on neck braces and right into ambulances. And within 10 or 15 minutes, we know their condition. He's awake. He's alert. He's got movement in his fingers. You and I don't need to know. The NASCAR community doesn't need to know. No one needs to know Ryan Newman's incomplete medical history, what an MRI looked like, what a CAT scan looked like. But I don't think it is a lot to ask if, as fans, we can know if someone is dead or alive 2.5 hours after a race if they know that information. Now, if he was unconscious and they didn't know it, fine. But none of that has come out yet. And I think, Eric, this becomes the problem. This is NASCAR's Super Bowl. On Sunday, there was 12 million people that were tuned in at the start of that race. And then I haven't seen yet the numbers come out for Monday night, but you can bet there's millions of people watching. And then this story went viral with the video of the wreck out there. So you now have a national audience kind of following this story, and no one really knew. And the writers and everybody gets on and chastise people and talk about don't speculate and this and that. Well, that's the other problem with this, Eric, is the NASCAR writers really showed their true colors in this whole thing. I don't believe any of them did any reporting. And it just goes to show you what you and I have talked about on this show, what we talk about offline. NASCAR has these writers, these journalists, I don't even know if you can call them journalists. They're more of bloggers because they're just telling us news we already know, under their thumb to the point that they don't even go out and do any type of reporting on this story. Even when Steve O'Donnell came out at about 10:30 on Monday night to make the announcement that Ryan Newman was basically going to live and he had serious injuries, there wasn't all the writers saying, oh, Steve O'Donnell in 15 minutes coming up. We couldn't even figure out if they were going to do a press conference at the hospital or at the track. You and I just happened to be on Daytona's presser feed. And then you go through this story. None of these guys had any information. You've got Roush officials there leaving. You've got track personnel working. No one can go ask and give the fans just a little bit of information. Was this guy awake? Was he alert? Was he conscious? Did you have to do CPR at the track? All this stuff is out there. And none of these writers, Eric, did anything to report. Marty Snyder was the only guy I saw that actually had information of NASCAR sending a jet to get Ryan Newman's wife to bring her to the hospital to help with medical decisions. That's the only piece of information that came out that was reported. Everything else has come out from a NASCAR statement or a Roush statement. So I don't know about you, but I was really disappointed with just the lack of true media journalists being able to get us information on this story. And again, we're not asking for every little piece of medical information, but when you're going to ask fans to invest their time in these drivers, and you have a driver like Ryan Newman that fans like you and I coming in have watched this guy since he was a rookie, watched him on pit road with his babies and his wife and his family, and then you're going to not be sure if he's dead or alive. I just feel like they need to do a lot better job of getting that information out to the fans so that they at least know something versus just thinking like, oh my God, he's dead. Well, he's serious injuries. Okay. Is he paralyzed? Is something been amputated? What's going on with him? And then 40 hours after the wreck, Eric, he's walking out of the hospital, which was great news, but it was so unexpected because of the way they set this story up. And I'm starting to wonder, did NASCAR just kind of hold everybody hostage to keep themselves in the news? I hope they're not that selfish, but I don't know any other reason why they would handle it the way they did.
As a conspiracy theorist, if you were one, you certainly would have the right and the thought to say NASCAR does these things to keep themselves in the news, to make themselves relevant. And like you said, there can be, I mean, one of the worst football injuries we've seen in the last couple of years was Ryan Shazier. And we knew right there on the field that something was majorly wrong, obviously.
Yeah.
But then we knew fairly quickly after that he didn't have much movement in his lower extremities. And so when you had the prayers for Ryan Shazier on social media and you had people directing their thoughts to a certain and specific thing, we're not asking again for a full medical workup, but you talked about it. We watched that Daytona feed and they actually had 4 microphones on the podium, which would be normally a drivers and team celebration. They actually came through and took 3 of them away, took one of the microphones and moved it to the center. And I texted you and said, and you were basically almost texting me at the same time with the same thing with, this looks eerily similar to when Mike Helton announced the death of Dale Earnhardt, because there's been no news up to this point. And that's what I just don't understand, is that you almost feel hostage in this day and age. I mean, social media, the way that everything can be reported. I mean, TMZ knew about the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and the other 8 passengers before Vanessa Bryant did. So how do we not know at least that Ryan Newman is alive in the moments afterward? Because clearly he was. So I think that it's unfortunate that you kind of put your fans in that position. So yeah, then you tell us, okay, he's got non-life threatening serious injuries a couple of hours after the race, and everyone can breathe a sigh of relief, especially everybody in the driving community, 40 other drivers who were just holding their breath. All these people in the NASCAR garage that have known Ryan Newman for years and years and have way more of a relationship with him than you and I ever will. And finally, they say, okay, he's alive. But then you don't hear anything. And so you and I start to wonder, okay, NASCAR sent a jet for Chrissy Newman. They flew her up, they flew her down there, which kind of leads you to believe that something's majorly wrong. And then you don't hear anything for all of Tuesday, really. The team comes out and says, okay, he's awake and talking to physicians. Well, the first thing I said was, why is that news? If you're now reporting 24 hours later that he's awake and speaking to physicians, I'm picturing him, because this is the only information I've been given as a fan, of him laying in bed, paralyzed, now coming out of his, maybe brief coma or unconsciousness, and family and friends surrounding him making tough decisions about not life or